Some men come home to silence and call it peace. I came home to my grandson, curled up on the bathroom floor, lips a color no 7-year-old's lips should ever be, and a daughter-in-law standing in the doorway asking me why I was back so soon. Let me back up. My name is Walter Briggs. I'm 68 years old. I spent 34 years as a structural inspector for the city of Toledo, Ohio, which means I spent my whole working life looking at buildings everyone else trusted and finding the one crack that meant the whole thing could come down. I know how to read a load-bearing wall. I know how to read the hairline fracture nobody else notices. Funny thing is, I didn't see the crack in my own family until it had already gone all the way through the foundation. I should tell you how I got here, because none of it makes sense without the beginning. My son Daniel lost his wife, Marie, to a drunk driver on Route 20 when their boy, my grandson Charlie, was 3 years old. Marie was the kind of daughter-in-law you don't get twice in a life. She used to save me the crossword from the Sunday paper because she said I did it better than her, even though we both knew that wasn't true. When she died, something in Daniel went quiet in a way I recognized, because I'd watched my own father go quiet the same way after my mother passed. Daniel raised Charlie alone for almost 3 years. Worked the early shift at a distribution warehouse so he could be home by 3, cooked dinner every night even when it was just grilled cheese, sat through every single one of Charlie's dinosaur monologues like they were quarterly earnings reports. I was proud of him. I told him so, which is more than my own father ever told me. Then Renee came along. Daniel met her at a work conference in Columbus, and when he brought her home to meet the family, I understood immediately why he'd fallen for her. She had a laugh that made a room feel warmer. She brought Charlie a telescope the first time she met him, not a toy one, an actual beginner's telescope, and she sat out on the back porch with him for 2 hours that first night pointing out Jupiter's moons. Charlie was 5. He told me the next day, very seriously, that Renee was going to be the best thing that ever happened to him. Kids don't know how to lie yet. That's what makes it so hard, later, when you realize they were wrong and it wasn't their fault. Daniel and Renee got married 18 months after they met. I walked Daniel down the aisle myself, since his mother had passed a decade before that, and I remember standing next to him at the altar thinking, this is good, this is right, this boy has earned some happiness. I want you to understand that I don't say any of this to make myself look like a fool in hindsight. I say it because I need you to understand how good the surface looked. Good house on Birchwood Lane. Good school for Charlie. A wife who posted pictures of family game nights with captions about gratitude and second chances. I saw Renee maybe twice a month because I live 40 minutes away in a townhouse I bought after my wife, Charlie's grandmother, passed 6 years back. I'd come for Sunday dinners when I could. I noticed things, the way you notice a hairline crack in a foundation, small things that don't mean anything, until you see 3 or 4 of them lined up. Charlie stopped asking me to look at the stars with him. That was the first thing. A boy who used to drag me out to the driveway with a flashlight to point out constellations he'd learned about, and by the spring of this year, he didn't ask anymore. He seemed tired more often than a 7-year-old should be tired. Once, in March, I picked him up from school for a dentist appointment because Daniel was stuck at work and Renee had, she said, a migraine. Charlie fell asleep in the car, in the 11 minutes it took to get to the dentist's office. 11 minutes. I remember thinking that was strange, and then I remember doing exactly what I'd trained myself never to do on a job site. I looked away from the crack because the wall looked fine everywhere else. Daniel travels sometimes for his job now. He got promoted to regional logistics coordinator, which meant 2 or 3 overnight trips a month to warehouses in Michigan and Indiana. Every time he was gone, I noticed Charlie seemed a little smaller when I saw him next, a little quieter. Once I called the house while Daniel was in Kalamazoo, and Renee answered sounding short of breath, almost irritated, and told me Charlie was already asleep even though it was 6:30 in the evening. I told myself boys need their rest. I told myself I was an old man who worried too much since my wife passed, that I was looking for problems the way retired men sometimes do because they've got nothing else to inspect anymore. I told myself a lot of things. Here's what 34 years on the job taught me about the buildings that fail. The failures that make the news, the collapses, they're never sudden. Something gives a little for months, sometimes years, and everybody who walks past it every day stops seeing it because it's always been like that. You need someone from outside to walk in fresh and say, wait, and 9-2, why is that beam bowing like that? I didn't have anybody from outside. I was inside the family, and I stopped seeing it too. It was a Thursday evening in early July when I decided, on a whim, to stop by Birchwood Lane on my way back from a hardware store because I'd found an old pocket knife of Daniel's dad's, my own father's, and I wanted to give it to Charlie for his birthday coming up. I hadn't called ahead. Daniel was in Fort Wayne that night. I knew that much from a text he'd sent the family group chat that morning. I figured I'd drop the knife off with Renee and be on my way, home in time for the 10 o'clock news like always. I pulled into the driveway a little after 7. The porch light was on. Nothing looked wrong. I want you to understand that. Nothing about that house looked wrong from the outside, same as it never does. I knocked, and when nobody answered after a minute, I tried the door, the way you do with family, and it was unlocked. I called out. Nothing. I heard water running somewhere upstairs, and something under it. A sound I didn't place right away because a grown man's mind doesn't want to place it. It was a small, wet, wheezing sound. I went up the stairs faster than I have moved in 15 years. The bathroom door was half open. Charlie was on the floor, on his side, next to the tub, and his lips had gone a shade of blue-gray I'd only ever seen once before, on my own father, in his last hour in a hospital bed in 1994. His breathing was shallow, and there was a strange, sweetish, chemical smell in that bathroom that didn't belong to any child's bath time I'd ever known. I dropped to my knees so hard I felt it in both hips for a week afterward. Charlie, Charlie, buddy, look at me. His eyes fluttered but didn't focus. I heard footsteps behind me and turned, and Renee was standing in the doorway in workout clothes, hair pulled back, phone in her hand, and her face did not look like a woman who had just found her stepson collapsed on a bathroom floor. Her face looked like a woman who had been interrupted. He gets like this sometimes, she said. Low blood sugar. He's fine, Walter, you're overreacting. I looked at my grandson's lips. I looked at his chest, barely moving. Something in me, some old cold part of myself I hadn't used since I identified my own father's body, came up through my ribs like rebar through concrete. He is not fine, I said, and I was already calling 911, my hands steadier than I felt. The ambulance took 9 minutes, which felt like 9 years. 2 paramedics came through that front door, a young woman and an older man with a gray mustache and a name tag that said Alvarez. And Alvarez stopped dead the second he came around the corner into that hallway and saw Charlie on the floor. He looked at Charlie. He looked at the bathroom. He looked at Renee, standing at the top of the stairs now with her arms crossed. And I watched something pass over his face that I recognized because I'd seen it on my own face, on job sites. The moment you realize the crack you're looking at isn't new, isn't isolated, it's the telltale sign of something structural that's been failing for a long, long time. He worked on Charlie with a calm that had clearly been trained into him over a career, while his partner called out numbers I didn't understand and didn't need to. I stood in that hallway holding an old pocket knife in my coat pocket like a fool, useless, 68 years old and useless in my own family's house. Then Alvarez stood, looked at me directly, and asked quietly if he could speak with me in the kitchen. I followed him. He pulled the door mostly shut behind us and kept his voice low, the voice of a man who has delivered bad news enough times to know how to pace it. Sir, what's your relationship to the boy? I'm his grandfather. His father's out of town for work. I stopped by to drop something off. Alvarez looked at me for a long moment, the way you look at a beam you're deciding whether to trust. I need to tell you something, and I need you to stay calm while I do, because that boy needs you steady right now. He paused. I've been to this house before, back in February. A call came in, child unresponsive, and when we arrived there was a woman here, said she was the stepmother, said the father was traveling and couldn't be reached. She told us the boy had a history of fainting spells. She was very composed, very rehearsed, if I'm honest with you now. The kitchen went very quiet around me. We filed a report, Alvarez said. Standard protocol, when something doesn't sit right. You didn't know about any of this, did you? It wasn't a question. He could see it on my face, same as I could see the truth of what he was telling me settling into my own chest like a slow leak in a foundation nobody had checked in years. No, I said. I did not know a single word of that. I rode in the ambulance with Charlie. Renee followed behind in her car, said she needed to grab his insurance card, though I noted, the way I used to note discrepancies in a blueprint against what was actually built, that Daniel kept that card in his own wallet, not hers. In those 10 minutes to St. Vincent's, sitting beside my grandson with an oxygen mask fogging against his small face, I made up my mind about something. I've spent 34 years condemning buildings that other people swore were fine. You learn, in that line of work, that the worst thing you can do is get emotional in the moment you find the crack. Emotional men get thrown off a job site. Calm men get the building shut down before it kills somebody. I sat there holding my grandson's hand and started building, brick by brick in my head, every piece of documentation I was going to need before the sun came up. I called Daniel from the waiting room at St. Vincent's. Told him to get in his truck and drive. Don't stop for anything. I'd explain everything when he got there. Then, because old habits from 34 years of city work don't leave a man, I called my neighbor Tom, who happened to be a retired Toledo police sergeant, and asked him, straight out, plainly, what a man does when he suspects a child in his family is being deliberately harmed, and he has no proof yet, only a feeling and one paramedic's off-the-record confession. Tom told me exactly what to do. Document everything, every date Daniel had traveled, every time I'd seen Charlie unusually tired or unusually quiet, every excuse Renee had ever given on the phone. Get it all down before emotion had a chance to sand off the sharp edges of memory. I sat in a cracked blue plastic chair in that waiting room at 1 in the morning and did exactly that, on the back of a hospital intake form, my handwriting getting worse the more my hands shook, but every date accurate, every detail exact, because that is the one skill 34 years of inspecting other people's failures had actually given me. I do not miss details. I had simply, foolishly, stopped applying that gift to my own family, the one place I decided didn't need inspecting. A doctor came out a little after 2 in the morning. A young woman, Dr. Patel on her badge, careful and precise with her words in the way of someone who has learned exactly how much truth a frightened old man can absorb standing up. Mr. Briggs, your grandson is stable. We're keeping him overnight. She paused in a way that told me the next sentence mattered more than the last one. We found elevated levels of a sedating antihistamine in his blood, far beyond anything you'd see from an accidental dose for a child his size or weight. Renee, sitting 2 chairs down from me by then, made a small, distressed sound. Oh my God, he must have gotten into the medicine cabinet again. He's done that before. I've told Daniel we need a lock on it. Doctor. Patel looked at her for 1 beat too long. We're required to notify Child Protective Services in a case like this, she said. It's standard when the levels are this significant. Of course, I said, before Renee could open her mouth again. Whatever you need. I felt Renee go very still beside me, the particular stillness of a woman recalculating. She left the hospital a little before 4, said she needed to shower and rest before Daniel got back, kissed my cheek at the door like nothing at all was wrong in the world. I watched her walk to her car through the waiting room glass, and the second her taillights disappeared out of the parking lot, I pulled out my phone and called my daughter, Charlie's Aunt Patricia, who works claims for an insurance company in Cleveland and knows more about reading a medical billing statement than most doctors do. Patricia walked me, over the phone, at 4 in the morning, through how to access the family insurance portal on my phone. What I found there, in the blue light of that little screen sitting in a hospital hallway, rearranged every assumption I'd been operating on for 2 years. 3 emergency room visits in the last 14 months, every single one on a date Daniel had been traveling for work. I didn't even need to check his travel calendar to know it before Patricia found it and confirmed it for me. 2 of those visits, prescriptions had been filled, under Charlie's name, using Daniel's insurance, for a sedating antihistamine, not by Charlie's regular pediatrician, Dr. Osei, who had known that boy since he was born, but by a walk-in urgent care clinic across town that Charlie had never once, to my knowledge, set foot in for any ordinary reason. Dr. Osei would have asked questions. Doctor. Osei would have called Daniel directly. Renee had found a clinic where nobody knew that family, paid the copay, filled the prescription, and driven home in time to have dinner on the table before Daniel walked in the door. Every overnight shift Daniel worked, every early morning route he ran to a warehouse in Kalamazoo or Fort Wayne, had paid for the very system Renee had built to hide what she was doing to his son inside his own house. I put the phone down on my knee, picked it back up, kept reading. I did not stop reading until Daniel walked through the emergency room doors at 4:40 in the morning, still in his work boots, face gray with fear, and I had to be the one to tell my own son that his wife had been drugging his boy for over a year while he was out earning the money that paid for it. Daniel didn't yell. I want you to know that about my son, because I raised him better than to make a scene where his boy might hear it. He went white, then he went very, very quiet. The same quiet I'd seen in him after Marie died, except this time there was something underneath it. Something with an edge to it that I recognized because it was the same thing I'd felt in that bathroom doorway. We were allowed in to see Charlie a little after 9 that morning. He was sitting up in a bed too big for him, an IV taped into the back of one small hand, watching cartoons without really watching them. When he saw his father in the doorway, his whole face changed. That particular look children get, that's half relief and half trying very hard not to cry in front of you. Dad. Daniel crossed that room in about 3 steps and held him for a long time without saying anything at all. I sat in the chair by the window and let them have that. When Daniel finally pulled back, he kept his voice easy, the way you'd talk to a spooked animal, and asked Charlie how he was feeling. My head hurts, Charlie said. Then, quieter, picking at the edge of his hospital bracelet, is Renee coming? The way he asked, it wasn't a boy missing somebody. It was a boy doing an assessment, the same kind I do walking into a building I don't trust yet. No, Daniel said. It's just us. I watched my grandson's shoulders drop, actual physical relief. The kind you'd see in a beam once you finally take the load off it. Daniel asked him, gently, what things were like at home when he traveled for work. Charlie went quiet for a long moment, looking at his bracelet instead of his father's face. Then, in the smallest voice I have ever heard out of that boy, he said, Renee gives me the medicine that makes me sleepy when her friends come over for wine. She says it helps me not be annoying. But Dad, it makes everything feel far away. Like I'm underwater and everybody's talking from the top of the pool. Nobody in that room said anything for a long moment. I have inspected buildings that were actively collapsing around me, and I have never in my life felt the floor drop out from under me the way it did. Hearing my 7-year-old grandson describe being drugged in language a child that age should never have needed to learn. The Child Protective Services caseworker, a steady, no-nonsense woman named Deborah Wills, met us in the hallway around 11. Daniel handed her the folder I had put together overnight, travel records I'd pulled from Daniel's phone, the insurance portal printouts Patricia had walked me through, my own handwritten timeline from that hospital chair. Every date and detail lined up like rebar, set before the concrete pours. She went through it page by page without speaking. Mr. Briggs, she finally said, this is more thorough documentation than I usually get from anybody, let alone a family member. I spent 34 years making sure paperwork matched what was actually built, I told her. I know what evidence looks like when it holds weight. She looked at me for a moment, then back down at the folder. Combined with your grandson's statement and the paramedic's prior report from February, this becomes a priority case as of right now. We're moving today. Daniel drove home to shower and meet with a family law attorney. A friend from work recommended a sharp, unhurried woman named Carol Jennings, whose office was above a bakery on Main Street in downtown Toledo. She read through our folder for what felt like a very long time without saying a word, then took her reading glasses off and set them on the desk. Mr. Briggs, Mr. Briggs, she said, looking between Daniel and me. I've been doing this 18 years. Judges in this county do not go easy on child endangerment, especially not with medical documentation this clean and a paramedic's report corroborating a prior incident. We can have an emergency protective order signed before the courts close today. I could have hugged that woman. I did not, because I am not that kind of man, but I wanted to. We drove back to the hospital. Daniel quiet behind the wheel in a way that told me the feelings were still catching up to him, same as mine were still catching up to me. Charlie was sitting up, eating a cup of hospital pudding, with the deep concentration of a boy who had opinions about the texture. And something in me eased just slightly seeing that, because a boy worrying about pudding texture is a boy who is still, underneath everything, 7 years old. When do I get to go home? He asked. This afternoon, Daniel told him, and Renee won't be there. Not tonight, not ever again, if I have anything to do with it. Charlie studied his father's face the way he'd studied mine in that bathroom doorway, checking for the adult truth behind the adult words. Whatever he found there must have satisfied him, because he nodded, and then asked if they could get pizza from Rosalie's, the place his mother Marie used to take him to on Fridays before she passed. Deep dish with pepperoni, because apparently a boy can survive nearly anything and still remember exactly what kind of pizza he wants that same night. Whatever you want, buddy, Daniel said, and he meant it in every direction that phrase could stretch. At 1:45 p.m, Deborah Wills called Daniel to say the emergency order had been signed. Renee was barred from the property, no contact with Charlie, effective immediately, and the police were moving forward with a felony child endangerment charge based on the medical evidence and the prior report. She asked if we knew where Renee might be right now, since they wanted to avoid serving papers at the house while Charlie was being discharged. Here's the thing about living around somebody for 3 years, even from 40 minutes away. You learn their patterns without meaning to. Renee had a standing Friday lunch with her book club, 4 women who met every single week without fail at a place called the Copper Kettle downtown. Same table by the window, every time. Daniel knew it too. She'd texted him that very morning. In fact, a message he showed me on his phone, cheerful, untroubled, heading to lunch with the girls. Hope Charlie's doing better. Love you. With a little heart at the end. I know exactly where she is, Daniel told Deborah Wills. And if you go now, she'll have an audience. I want you to picture the Copper Kettle at noon on a Friday. White tablecloths. That particular hum of a lunch crowd that's mostly professional women and retirees, wine already poured at the table by the window where 4 women sat with their heads together, laughing about something, Renee at the center of it in a blazer the color of good cream, looking, for all the world, like a woman without a single consequence anywhere in her future. I was not there myself. Daniel told me later how the hostess described it, how the room didn't stop all at once but slowed table by table, the way a room does when everyone senses something is happening that they don't want to be caught staring at directly. 2 officers and Deborah Wills walked straight to that window table and laid the protective order and the warrant down on the white tablecloth right beside her wine glass. Renee Briggs, I'm Deborah Wills, County Child Protective Services. These officers are here regarding a felony child endangerment charge. Renee looked at the papers, then up at the officers, then at her 3 friends, who had gone completely, perfectly silent. This is a misunderstanding, she said, in the same composed, reasonable voice that had worked on doctors and teachers and one very trusting husband for 3 years. My husband doesn't have the full picture. Ma'am, please stand up, one of the officers said, quiet and final. She looked for a way out of that room, Daniel told me, the way people do when they're calculating whether a situation is still survivable. It was not. The handcuffs went on in full view of that window table, the next table over, the bar, the entire Friday lunch crowd of the Copper Kettle. Not one of her 3 friends stood up. Not one. By the time Charlie came home that afternoon, discharged and declared stable, still wearing his hospital bracelet because he'd decided it was a pretty good accessory, Daniel had already changed the locks, called the school to remove Renee from every emergency contact and pickup list, and pulled her name off the insurance policy. You handle the things that need to run clean, quickly, before anybody has time to talk their way back in. Charlie walked through his own front door, looked around the way you'd check whether the air in a room had changed, and dropped his backpack in the exact spot by the stairs that used to make Renee furious, the spot Daniel had never once asked him to move it from. It smells different, Charlie said. Good different or bad different? He thought about it with the same seriousness he gave his pudding. Good, he said. Like when you open a window. Rosalie's pizza arrived a little after 6, deep dish with pepperoni, And the three of us ate it sitting on the living room floor because Charlie wanted to watch a documentary about wolves, and none of us had a single objection to that plan. He fell asleep leaning against his father's shoulder around 8:15. A real sleep, deep and even, the kind of sleep that belongs to a child who has nothing left to fear inside his own house that night. I sat in the recliner across from them for a long while, just watching that boy breathe steady and slow, the same rhythm I remembered from when he was a baby, and I used to hold him so Daniel could finally sleep after Marie passed. I thought about Marie, how she would have caught this in about a week flat, how she never once let anything slide past her the way I had. I thought about how close I had come to letting this crack run all the way through the wall before anybody noticed it. Renee was processed at the county jail that evening on the felony charge. Daniel got the text around 8 and read it out loud to me, quiet, and then set the phone face down on the carpet and didn't say anything else for a long while. He didn't need to. Some things you feel in your chest instead of your mouth. I drove home a little after 9 that night, 40 minutes back to my townhouse, the whole way turning over in my head every single time I'd told myself Charlie was just tired, just a quiet kid, just fine. I don't intend to make that mistake again, not with this family, not with anybody I love. A man can spend 34 years learning to read the cracks in other people's buildings and still walk right past the one growing in his own son's house, if he lets himself believe, even for a minute, that the people he loves most don't need to be looked at closely too. Charlie's better now, slowly, but truly. He asked me out to the driveway 2 weekends ago with his old flashlight, wanting to look at Jupiter's moons again, and I stood out there with him in the cold for 45 minutes past both our bedtimes, because some doors, once you get them open again, you don't shut early for anything.